Adrian was cheating on me. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find his mistress. In the steam-filled bathroom, severely depressed, I lay in the bathtub, letting the blood from my wrists drip into the water, watching my life slip away. It was my sister, Natalie, who kicked the door open and saved me. It was Natalie who later drove her car straight into Adrian, leaving him half dead, forcing him to get on his knees in front of my hospital bed to beg for my forgiveness. From that day on, Adrian changed. He stopped staying out late at elite clubs. He came straight home from work every single day. Even if he ran into other women on the street, he would literally step 30 feet away to keep his distance. I thought our marriage had finally reached a turning point, until today when I received a FaceTime call from myself, 10 years in the future. Looking at the pale, sickly me on the screen, I frowned and asked, "But he stopped cheating, didn't he?" The future me didn't say a word. She just flipped the camera. On the screen, Adrian was gently caressing Natalie's swollen, pregnant belly. His eyes were filled with an agonizing, suppressed pain. "It's been 10 years, Natalie. Please, don't abort this baby again, okay? How much longer are you going to punish me?" Natalie was sobbing, tears streaming down her face. "We betrayed Chloe. This baby, we don't deserve to keep it." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The mistress I could never find, the woman my husband was sleeping with, was my beloved sister. Adrian had hidden her so well. He hid her so well that she was pregnant, and I hadn't suspected a thing. The camera flipped back to my future self. 10 years later, I stare at myself with a wild, crazed laugh. Do you hear them? Adrian never loved you. Just pull the trigger. End it now. Set them free. I lower my eyes and slowly picked up the pistol from the desk. I pressed the cold metal barrel against my temple. Adrian is a total germaphobe, Chloe. Why do you think he suddenly volunteers to take out the trash every single day? Did you really think Natalie was staying with us just to help watch him? Don't be stupid. Go look at the blind spot behind the garage. Those 10 minutes when he takes out the trash is the only time they get to escape your suffocating presence. They use that time to make out like animals. The front door clicked open. Adrian was home. Seeing the gun pressed against my temple, his face instantly went dead white. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing?" He didn't even take off his shoes. He lunged forward like a madman. The voice on the phone kept screaming. "Look at his wrist. You know how severe his OCD is. Look at him right now." Adrian had severe germophobia and OCD. His shirt cuffs were always folded back exactly 3 times, perfectly neat, exposing his wrists. But right now, his cuffs were messy and unbuttoned. There was even a faint smudge of red lipstick on the edge of the fabric. My gaze drifted past him, landing on Natalie. Her makeup was slightly smeared. Clink. My hands lost all strength. The gun slipped, almost grazing my ear as it hit the table. Adrian stopped dead in his tracks, his hands raised in the air, speaking in a trembling, soothing voice. "Chloe, put the gun down. Please, don't hurt yourself." I stared at his messy cuffs, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "Who is she?" Adrian froze. He quickly unlocked his phone, opened his Snapchat location history, and thrust it in front of me. I just went down to empty the trash bin. It was right outside. It took less than 10 minutes. A deep, exhausting weariness washed over his eyes. "Chloe, that incident happened 3 years ago. How much longer are you going to keep dragging me through this hell? I am so tired from taking care of you every single day. Please stop being so paranoid." As he spoke, he stepped forward, trying to grab the gun. I waved the pistol wildly, stepping back. "Don't touch me." The gun knocked against the edge of the desk. In my panic, my finger pulled the trigger. A loud bang echoed through the room. The bullet grazed my palm, and bright red blood spurted out, dripping heavily onto the hardwood floor. "Chloe," Natalie screamed and rushed forward to stop me. But she ran too fast, twisting her ankle and crashing hard against the side cabinet. "Natalie." Adrian lunged forward almost instinctively to catch her. But just as his hands were about to touch her waist, he seemed to realize something. He froze in midair, forcing his hands back. Natalie looked at my bleeding hand, turned around, and slapped Adrian across the face. "You bastard. You pushed her again. You know she is sick." The slap was incredibly loud. Adrian's head snapped to the side. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, fighting to control his exploding emotions. When he turned back to look at me, all the frustration and disgust in his eyes had vanished. He was back to being the submissive, gentle husband again. "I'm sorry. I lost my temper. Chloe, you're bleeding. Let me bandage it." Adrian knelt in front of me, but his eyes were glued to Natalie's swollen ankle. After quickly wrapping my hand, he naturally handed the first aid kit to Natalie. His voice was incredibly hoarse. "Put some ice on that ankle. Now." Watching his pathetic, secretive tenderness toward her, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and locked myself in the bedroom. 3 years ago, when I first caught Adrian cheating, I had searched every hotel room like a lunatic, but I couldn't find a single strand of that woman's hair. In utter despair, I locked myself in the bathroom and slit my wrists. It was Natalie who drove her car into him, dragging his bloodied body to my bedside to confess. That day, the proud Adrian had knelt before me, crying like a child who had lost his entire world. "Chloe, I beg you. You can't die. I love you." That heartbreaking display made me believe he actually loved me. But now, a phone call from the future had shattered every beautiful lie I lived in. This wasn't just a corporate office. It was a perfect, one-to-one replica of our master bedroom. The dark green velvet sofa, the floor lamp in the corner that Adrian had personally picked out. Even the fresh lilies on the coffee table were identical to the ones we had at home. But there was one major difference. The wall where our wedding photo should have hung was covered in hundreds of photos of Natalie. Natalie cooking in the kitchen. Natalie sleeping on the sofa. Every photo was shot with breathtaking lighting and warmth. Even through the paper, I could feel an overwhelming, suffocating love. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I remembered our honeymoon. I had spent 2 hours on my makeup, happily begging Adrian to take a photo of me. He had just clicked the shutter twice, completely distracted, leaving me with 2 blurry, ugly pictures. It turned out he didn't hate taking photos. He just saved all of his patience and love for Natalie. Footsteps echoed outside the door. I snapped out of my daze and hid inside the walk-in closet. The door pushed open. "Let go of me." Natalie choked back a sob, trying to shake off Adrian's grip. But Adrian held her tightly, pressing her against his chest like a madman. "Natalie, I can't do this anymore." When she held that gun today, all I could think was, if she just pulled the trigger, would we finally be free? Natalie slapped him hard. "You monster. She is your wife. But I don't love her." Adrian's eyes were bloodshot, his voice dripping with despair. "You have no idea how much I suffocate sleeping next to her every night." "Natalie, let me just tell her the truth. If she agrees to a divorce, I will give her every single penny I own." Natalie broke down crying. "No. If you tell her now, you will kill her." Adrian buried his face in her neck, clinging to her like a drowning man. "What about me? You worry about her, but who is going to save me?" Natalie wept as if her heart was breaking. "When we were 10, she pushed me out of the way of that speeding truck. I swore I would protect her with my life. But I fell in love with her husband. And when you pissed off those thugs for your business deal, she was the one who got cornered in the parking lot for you. If it weren't for us, Chloe wouldn't be sick. How can we do this to her?" Adrian trembled, kissing her tears away. Inside the dark closet, my nails dug deep into the wound on my palm. The blood started flowing again, but I couldn't feel any pain. So that was the truth. How beautiful. How romantic. One betrayed her own heart to repay a life-saving debt. The other carried a heavy cross out of guilt. In their grand, epic, tragic love story, what the hell was I? After what felt like an eternity, the room fell silent. I crawled out of the closet and walked out of the office building, stumbling like a ghost. The freezing winter wind slashed my face, drying my tears. I suddenly remembered the day Adrian had thrown the divorce papers at me, screaming that he wanted out even if it meant losing everything. But then he suddenly stopped mentioning it. He wasn't staying for me. He was terrified that my death would stain his hands and that Natalie would never be able to live with the guilt. Since they were in so much pain, I decided to set them free. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. "Marcus, please draft a divorce agreement for me. As fast as possible." The line went dead silent for a long time. "Chloe, is this a joke?" Marcus's voice was filled with confusion and pity. "There is no marriage record for you and Adrian in the county system. Chloe, in the eyes of the law, you are still single." I stood on the freezing street, my mind going completely blank. So, Adrian gave me a diamond ring, a lavish wedding, and took care of me daily. But he kept his legal status absolutely clean and single for Natalie. Even when he was acting out this marriage with me, he was saving his legal wife's spot for her. I laughed. I laughed until my face was soaked with tears. Yet, holding on to the very last shred of hope, I redialed the number from 10 years later. "I want to know, did he ever love me? Even for a second?" The line was quiet for a long while. "Go to the VIP wing of the hospital right now. You'll see how pathetic your question is." I walked to the hospital, like a hollow shell. Through the glass window of the private room, I saw Natalie throwing up into a basin, likely from a stomach bug. And Adrian, the man who couldn't stand a speck of dust, the extreme germaphobe, was gently wiping the vomit from the corner of her mouth with his bare hand. My tears fell silently. 6 months ago, when I threw up in the middle of the night due to my antidepressant side effects, what did he do? He recoiled as if he had been shocked, frowning as he called the maid to clean it up. Then he locked himself in the bathroom and took 3 showers. He didn't look at me once as I lay gasping on the floor. But with Natalie, his germophobia completely disappeared. Adrian came out carrying the basin. Seeing me, he immediately shut the door behind him. Seeing my bare feet and blue lips, his defensive stance relaxed. He took off his coat and wrapped it around me. Are you insane? Running out like this in the middle of the night? Do you want to die? Even now, he was still playing the dutiful protector. I stared at him, my voice eerily calm. She's in there, right? Adrian's face darkened, his grip on my shoulder tightening. That's an important client. You're having an episode. I'm taking you home. I shoved him hard and slammed the door open. Chloe, Adrian roared. The person on the bed gasped, quickly pulling the blanket over her head. I reached for the edge of the blanket. I could have ripped their lies apart right then and there, but my hand froze. Even at this point, I wanted to hear them admit it. Under Adrian's terrified gaze, I pulled a small pocket knife from my coat. I pointed it directly at my chest. Adrian, pull that blanket off. Tell me who she is. Or I will die right here, tonight. Your choice. Adrian didn't move. The patience in his eyes slowly turned into pure disgust. Chloe, do you think threatening me with your life still works? For 3 years, every time something doesn't go your way, you play the suicide card. Don't you get tired of playing the girl who cried wolf? The girl who cried wolf. So, every time I had reached out to him while drowning in depression, it was just a cheap performance in his eyes. The final spark of hope in my heart died. I gave a soft laugh and plunged the knife toward my chest. Adrian's face deformed in horror. Don't you dare touch her. Without even looking at where my knife was aimed, he lunged forward and kicked me squarely in the stomach. I flew backward, crashing violently onto the hard floor. A sharp, tearing pain exploded in my lower abdomen. But I didn't cry. I just watched him wrap his arms around the woman on the bed, shielding her with his body, staring at me like I was a rabid animal. He thought I was going to hurt her, so he didn't hesitate to break me. In that moment, I was truly, completely exhausted. Adrian, the game is over. Let's end this. Adrian's shock lasted only 3 seconds before he sneered. Stop testing me. If you really wanted to leave, you would have done it years ago. This time, I mean it. Crash. The person on the bed, trembling violently, fell off the mattress and landed straight into the shattered glass of a dropped water cup. A muffled cry of pain came from under the blanket. Adrian panicked. He scooped her up in his arms, rushing toward the door without a single backward glance at me. Don't worry, honey. I've got you. Let's find a doctor. I lay on the freezing tile floor, watching a dark, terrifying pool of blood spread from beneath my legs. Before I even knew I was pregnant, I had a miscarriage. Adrian sat by my bedside, his face filled with guilt. Chloe, it just wasn't the right time. Once you get better, we can try again. I stared at him blankly, catching the subtle sigh of relief in his eyes. This was the second child we had lost. 3 years ago, during my first pregnancy, Natalie had moved in to help take care of me. That was when she and Adrian started. After that, Adrian stopped coming home. On the night Natalie also didn't return, I slipped in the bathroom and suffered a massive hemorrhage, losing the baby. It was after that night that I found his cheating evidence and tried to slit my wrists. How pathetic. My 2 unborn children were nothing but collateral damage in their grand romance. Adrian clearly recalled that night too. He couldn't look me in the eye. He mumbled something about paying the hospital bill and fled the room. My phone screen lit up. Do you really think you miscarried because of his kick? The pills he's been giving you for years, they weren't just antidepressants. They were laced with birth control. Even if you got pregnant by accident, you could never carry a baby to term. Chloe, let go. The longer you stay alive to block them, the stronger their love grows. Only your death can pin them to the pillar of shame forever. I silently hung up the phone. No screaming. No crying. After being discharged, I was unnaturally quiet. I stopped checking his phone. I stopped asking questions. But the quieter I became, the more terrified they grew. Finally, Adrian couldn't take the tension anymore. There's an emergency at the office. I need to go out of town for a week. He watched me closely, bracing himself for an explosive meltdown. But I just nodded calmly. Okay. Then I looked at Natalie. You must be tired of looking after me, Natalie. Take this week off too. I can manage. Both of them froze. They hadn't expected me to agree so easily. The excuses they had prepared died in their throats. Adrian tried to probe. Chloe, that day at the hospital, did you see something? I looked at him. See what? Seeing my blank face, he let out a huge sigh of relief. His eyes softened. When I get back, I'll take you to Switzerland to see the Alps, okay? Switzerland. For 3 years, I had begged him to take me. He had always refused, saying it was too far, that I was too sick, and that I would only be a burden. And I had waited for 3 years. I whispered, okay. That night, the guest room door wasn't fully closed. Natalie's soft crying floated down the hallway. Adrian, are we being too cruel to Chloe? She just had a miscarriage. Adrian's voice was cold and absolute. I'm doing this to save all of us. If she stays here, she will eventually drive us both insane. Sending her to a private sanatorium in Switzerland is the best choice for everyone. So that was his plan. It was never about fulfilling my dream. It wasn't an apology. They wanted to dump me in the freezing snow of a foreign country forever, clearing the path for their beautiful love. I smiled silently. Why go through all that trouble? I walked back to my room, turned on the faucet, and filled the bathtub to the brim. As the blade sliced through my vein, the blood bloomed in the water like beautiful silk ribbons. For the first time in 3 years, I felt entirely free. But freedom, I soon realized, is not a quiet grave. It is a clean slate. The darkness that rolled over me was not the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for years. It was light, almost weightless. In that dark expanse, the frantic, high-pitched ringing of a phone echoed from a great distance. Chloe, Chloe, answer me. It was the voice of the woman from 10 years in the future. My own voice, raspy and desperate. But as my consciousness began to drift back toward the surface, the illusion of the future shattered, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of the present. I didn't die. I woke to the rhythmic, sterile beep of a heart monitor and the sharp, chemical stench of rubbing alcohol. My left wrist was wrapped in thick, heavy gauze, throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. The ceiling of the hospital room was a grid of pale tiles, blindingly bright. Beside my bed, Adrian sat slumped in a chair, his head buried in his hands. His clothes were wrinkled, an unthinkable state for a man who usually spent 10 minutes every morning ensuring his collar was aligned to the millimeter. When he heard the rustle of the hospital sheets, he flinched and looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark, hollow circles. Chloe, he breathed, his voice cracking. He reached out to grab my hand, but he stopped himself, his fingers hovering inches from my skin. The memory of the hospital floor, of his boots slamming into my stomach, of the blood pooling between my thighs, hung in the air like a physical barrier. You're awake, he whispered. The doctors, they said you lost a lot of blood, but you're stable. I looked at him, my expression entirely blank. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The storm that had raged inside my chest for 3 years had vanished, replaced by a vast, freezing void. Where is Natalie? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Adrian's face went stiff. He swallowed hard, looking down at his neat, folded cuffs, now stained with a small, circular smudge of dried blood. She's at home. She wanted to stay, but I told her to rest. She was hysterical, Chloe. We both were. Hysterical, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. I'm so sorry, he said, the tears finally spilling over his eyelids. He fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in the mattress, just like he had 3 years ago. I was out of my mind, Chloe. When you drew that knife, I thought you were going to hurt her. I didn't mean to kick you. I swear to God, I didn't know you were pregnant. If he had known, he would have found a cleaner, quieter way to rid himself of the child, I thought. I looked at the top of his head, at the perfect, dark strands of his hair. A profound, icy clarity washed over me. There was no future Chloe on that FaceTime call. The FaceTime call from 10 years in the future was a ghost I had built myself. 3 weeks ago, during one of Adrian's late-night emergency meetings, I had found his hidden safe in the corporate office. Inside, I didn't just find photos of Natalie. I found a small, amber prescription bottle containing a chemical compound that didn't match the label on my antidepressant bottle. I took a few of the pills to an independent lab. The results came back 48 hours later. High dosage, long-term synthetic estrogen and progestin. They were chemical sterilizers. He had been feeding them to me under the guise of my mental health medication, ensuring I would never bear his children, ensuring I would remain the sick, fragile, dependent wife who could be easily discarded when the time was right. The shock of that discovery had cracked my mind in two. The traumatized, love-struck girl who had spent 3 years begging for his affection couldn't bear the truth. She wanted to believe the lies. She wanted to believe he loved her. So, the other part of me, the cold, dormant survivor who had once pushed her sister out of the way of a speeding truck, took over. I used a high-fidelity AI voice and face cloning software. I fed it older videos of myself, aged the face by 10 years, added a layer of sickly pallor, and programmed the script using the cold, hard data I had uncovered. I scheduled the FaceTime call to bypass my phone's lock screen using a pre-installed developer app. I had to build a monster from the future to scream the truth into my own face. I had to terrify myself into action, because the weak, pathetic Chloe was too blind to save herself. And the suicide attempt in the bathtub? I had calculated the depth of the cut. I had timed it perfectly. Exactly 12 minutes before Adrian's scheduled return, I had triggered a silent, GPS-linked medical alert to Marcus, my lawyer, and a private ambulance service I had paid in cash. I didn't want to die. I wanted them to believe I was dead. I wanted them to feel the absolute, terrifying weight of their own guilt, to believe they had finally driven the fragile, broken Chloe to her end. Adrian, I said softly, my voice devoid of any anger. He looked up, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic hope. I'm tired, I whispered, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. You were right. I'm so sick. I can't keep living like this. No, Chloe, don't say that, he pleaded, grabbing my bandaged hand, squeezing it as if he could hold my soul inside my body. We're going to get you help. The clinic in Switzerland, it's one of the best in the world. They specialize in severe, treatment-resistant depression. I've already booked the private transport. We can leave next week. Just the two of us. I'll stay with you. I'll do whatever it takes. Just the two of us? I asked, staring deep into his eyes, searching for the lie. Just us, he promised, his voice filled with a sickening, desperate tenderness. Natalie will stay behind to manage the house. I promise you, Chloe. I will never let anyone come between us again. He was lying, of course. The clinic in Switzerland wasn't a place of healing. It was a high-end, highly secluded psychiatric sanatorium where wealthy families sent their inconvenient relatives to be heavily sedated and forgotten. Once I crossed those doors, I would be declared legally incompetent, signed over to his care, and locked away in a gilded cage while he and Natalie lived off the scraps of my existence. Okay, I whispered, closing my eyes. Take me to Switzerland, Adrian. A shuddering sigh of relief escaped his lips. He pressed his forehead against my hand, weeping in gratitude. He thought he had won. He thought the girl who cried wolf had finally surrendered to the cage. But as I lay there in the sterile hospital bed, listening to the steady, rhythmic beat of the monitor, I felt the cold, sharp teeth of the trap I had built slowly begin to close. 3 days later, I was discharged. The ride home was silent. Adrian drove with a rigid, tense posture, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Natalie sat in the front passenger seat, her head turned toward the window, refusing to look at either of us. Her ankle was still wrapped in a supportive brace, a physical reminder of the night the illusion shattered. When we arrived at the villa, the air was thick with an unbearable, suffocating tension. I walked into the house like a guest in a mausoleum. Everything was exactly as it had been. The dark green velvet sofa, the fresh lilies on the entryway table, the gleaming hardwood floors. But the warmth had been entirely drained from the space. It felt hollow, a stage set waiting for the final act. I'll help you up to the room, Chloe, Natalie said, her voice quiet and trembling. She stepped toward me, her eyes filled with a complex, agonizing mixture of guilt, pity, and fear. No, Adrian intervened sharply, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. I'll do it. You need to rest your ankle, Natalie. Natalie flinched, her lips tightening into a thin line. She looked at Adrian, a flicker of resentment crossing her face, before she nodded and turned toward the guest wing. She was beginning to realize that the man she had betrayed her sister for was not a romantic hero. He was a dictator, and she was merely his next subject. In the master bedroom, Adrian helped me onto the bed with an agonizingly slow, performative gentleness. He tucked the duvet around my legs, smoothed down the sheets, and set a glass of water on the nightstand. The doctor prescribed a new sedative for the transition period, he said, pulling a small white bottle from his pocket. It will help with the anxiety and the transition to the altitude in the Alps. I want you to take one now. I looked at the white pill in his palm. Thank you, Adrian, I said, taking the pill from his hand. He smiled, a tight, artificial stretch of his lips, and watched me closely as I placed the pill in my mouth and took a sip of water. I swallowed, letting him see the movement of my throat. Only when he turned his back to place the bottle in the drawer did I slip the pill from beneath my tongue, hiding it in the fold of my bandaged wrist. Rest now, he murmured, kissing my forehead. His skin was cold, smelling faintly of the expensive, pine-scented soap he used to wash away the imaginary dirt of the world. I have a few legal documents to finalize with Marcus before our flight on Monday. I'll be in the study. Don't work too hard, I whispered. As soon as the door clicked shut, I sat up. The fragility drained from my limbs, replaced by a cold, electric energy. I pulled the pill from my bandage and dropped it into a small plastic bag I kept hidden inside the hollow lining of my jewelry box. I had a dozen of them now. I slid out of bed and walked to the window. Below, in the courtyard, I could see Adrian walking toward his study in the detached garage building. But he didn't go straight to the study. He stopped near the blind spot behind the garage, the exact spot the future Chloe had warned me about. A few seconds later, Natalie emerged from the side door. I watched through the glass as they stood in the shadows of the concrete wall. Adrian reached out, his hand grasping her arm with a desperate, aggressive intensity. Natalie tried to pull away, but he pulled her closer, his head dropping onto her shoulder. Even from this distance, I could see the frantic, trembling movement of his shoulders. He was unraveling. The clean, controlled world he had constructed was slipping through his fingers, and he was clinging to her like a drowning man grasping at a blade of glass. Natalie didn't hug him back. Her hands remained flat against his chest, pushing him away. She was drowning in her own guilt, suffocated by the ghost of the sister she thought she had killed. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. "Chloe." Marcus's voice was tight, filled with unease. "I've been waiting for your call. I have the draft of the asset separation ready, but are you sure about this? Adrian's legal team has been incredibly thorough. Since there is no legal marriage certificate, the joint trust we set up 5 years ago is highly vulnerable. If we push this to court, he could freeze everything." "We aren't going to court, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and calm. "And we don't need a marriage certificate." "What do you mean?" "Adrian has severe OCD and germophobia, but his greatest sickness is his need for absolute control," I explained, staring down at the 2 figures in the courtyard. 5 years ago, when he convinced me to sign the joint trust agreement, he had me sign a power of attorney document, giving him full control over my family's inheritance in case of my mental incapacitation. Do you remember? Of course. I warned you against it back then. He was smart, but he was also lazy. He used the same notary and the same structural template for his own private holdings, the shell companies he uses to hide his offshore accounts. Last year, when he was taking care of me during my recovery from the first miscarriage, he brought me a stack of papers to sign. He told me they were medical release forms, but I noticed one of them was a mutual reciprocal power of attorney. A sharp intake of breath came over the line. Mutual? He wanted to make sure that if I ever tried to kill myself and ended up in a vegetative state, he could access my family's trust without a fight. But to make it look legally balanced to the offshore trustees, he made the agreement reciprocal. He thought I was too drugged, too broken to ever notice. He thought I would be dead or locked away long before I could ever use it. "Chloe, if that agreement is reciprocal and you have copies of his digital signatures." "I don't just have copies, Marcus. I have the original physical documents, signed in his own hand, authenticated by his own private notary, who happens to be a man I paid a very large sum of money to 3 weeks ago." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want you to initiate the transfer of the offshore assets to the Swiss account we discussed. Do it quietly, in increments, over the next 48 hours. By the time our plane lands in Geneva on Monday, Adrian's corporate empire will be nothing but an empty shell." "And the medical records?" "Send them to the Swiss Medical Board and the local authorities in Geneva. The toxicological analysis of the antidepressants he's been giving me, the records of Natalie's abortions, and the financial trail of the private clinic he booked. Let them see exactly what kind of treatment he had planned for me." "It's a dangerous game, Chloe," Marcus warned. "If he realizes what you're doing before you get on that plane, he'll destroy you." "He won't realize," I said, watching Adrian kiss Natalie's forehead before turning to walk toward his office. "He's too busy cleaning the dirt off his hands." The private jet touched down in Geneva on a crisp, gray Monday morning. The mountains in the distance were capped with thick, heavy snow, jagged teeth tearing into the pale sky. The air that greeted us when the cabin door opened was freezing, so cold it burned the back of my throat. Adrian walked beside me, his hand firmly holding my elbow. His grip was tight, almost painful, masquerading as protective support. Natalie followed behind us, carrying her own small suitcase. She looked like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes hollow and fixed on the ground. "The private transport is waiting," Adrian said, his voice tight. He hadn't slept during the entire 8-hour flight. He had spent the time obsessively wiping his hands with disinfectant wipes, his fingers raw and red from the friction. The drive up into the Alps was long and winding. As the elevation rose, the pine trees became heavily laden with snow, and the roads narrowed into dangerous, icy ledges. The clinic was located in a secluded valley, miles away from the nearest town. It was a beautiful, imposing stone structure that looked more like a medieval fortress than a hospital. The high stone walls were covered in frozen ivy, and the tall, arched windows reflected the gray, lifeless sky. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Chloe?" Adrian whispered, his eyes gleaming with a frantic, desperate relief. "You'll be safe here. No more distractions. No more pain." "It's perfect, Adrian," I said, offering him a small, vacant smile. We were checked in by a cold, professional receptionist who didn't look us in the eye. Adrian had booked a private, 3-bedroom chalet on the edge of the clinic's grounds, a luxury suite meant for families who wished to stay with their loved ones during the transition period. The chalet was pristine. The wood-paneled walls were polished to a high shine, and a massive stone fireplace crackled with a roaring fire. It was warm, sterile, and entirely isolated. I've arranged for the medical director, Dr. Keller, to meet us here at 7 for your initial evaluation, Adrian said, checking his watch. It was currently 4 in the afternoon. In the meantime, let's unpack. Natalie, go prepare some tea. Natalie didn't move. She stood near the door, her coat still on, her boots covered in melting snow. I'm not making tea, Adrian, she said, her voice flat and cold. Adrian froze. He turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? I said, I'm not making tea, she repeated, stepping forward. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. I want to talk to Chloe. Alone. Have you lost your mind? Adrian hissed, his face darkening with a sudden, violent rage. He stepped between her and me. Chloe needs to rest. She has an evaluation in 3 hours. Go to your room. No. Natalie screamed, the sound echoing off the high wooden rafters. Tears finally spilled over her cheeks. I can't do this anymore, Adrian. Look at her. She's like a walking corpse. We did this to her. We killed her babies. We ruined her life. And now you're locking her away in this freezing prison so we can run away together? I can't live with this. I see her face every time I close my eyes. Shut up, Adrian roared, his hand flying out. He didn't strike her, but the sheer violence of his movement forced her backward, her brace scraping against the wooden floor. You think you're the only one suffering? Adrian whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, suppressed madness. He stepped closer to her, his knuckles white, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I built this entire life for us, Natalie. I lived in that house with a woman I couldn't stand to touch, sleeping in a bed that felt like a grave, just so I could keep you safe. If she dies, if she kills herself, the guilt will destroy you. You know it will. This is the only way. We put her here, where she can't hurt herself, and we finally get to be free. Free? Natalie laughed, a wild, broken sound. You think this is freedom? You're a monster, Adrian. And I'm a monster for loving you. I sat on the dark leather sofa by the fire, quietly watching them. The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the ugly, twisted truth of their epic romance. There was no love here. There was only a desperate, suffocating dependency built on a foundation of blood, guilt, and lies. Are you finished? I asked softly. Both of them froze. They turned to look at me, their breathing heavy, their faces pale. I stood up from the sofa. For the first time in 3 years, I stood straight, my shoulders back, the fragile, vacant look entirely gone from my eyes. What? Chloe? Natalie whispered, her eyes widening in confusion. I walked over to the dining table, where my laptop lay open. I tapped the spacebar, and a loud, crisp audio recording began to play through the chalet's Bluetooth speakers. When we were 10, she pushed me out of the way of that speeding truck. And when you pissed off those thugs, she was the one who got cornered. It was Natalie's voice, from the recording I had made in the closet 3 weeks ago. Adrian's face went dead white. Chloe, what is this? He stammered, stepping toward me. How did you? And then there's this one, I said, tapping the screen again. A different audio file played. It was a phone call, recorded 6 years ago. Yeah, it's Adrian. The girl, Chloe, she's going to be in the parking lot behind the financial district at 8 p.m. Make it look like a robbery. Rough her up a bit, but don't break anything. Just make sure her sister, Natalie, sees it. Let her think it was because of my business rivals. I want her to feel like she owes me everything for saving her afterward. Here's the first half of the payment. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. Natalie turned her head slowly, her eyes wide, staring at Adrian as if she were looking at a demon. Adrian, she whispered, her voice cracking. That those thugs, the ones who beat Chloe until she had a concussion, the ones who made me feel like it was my fault because of my debt to you. No, Natalie, it's a lie. It's a deep fake. Adrian screamed, his face deforming in terror. He lunged toward the laptop, but I closed it with a sharp click and stepped back. It's not a deep fake, Natalie, I said, my voice cold as the mountain air. I found the digital audio archives on his secure cloud server. He recorded every single phone call, every transaction, every blackmail negotiation. He kept them like trophies. He didn't just orchestrate the parking lot attack. He also hired the driver of the speeding truck when we were 10. Natalie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. What? The truck driver was a gambling addict who owed money to Adrian's father's firm. I continued, staring directly into Adrian's terrified eyes. He was paid to stage a near miss. But he was drunk and he came too close. I pushed you out of the way, Natalie, because I loved you. But Adrian wanted to make sure you were bound to him, and to me, by a debt of blood that you could never repay. He wanted us both locked in a circle of guilt that only he could control. You absolute monster, Natalie shrieked. She lunged at him, her fingernails clawing at his face. Adrian reacted instinctively, pushing her away with a violent shove. Natalie fell hard against the stone fireplace, her head striking the edge of the hearth with a dull, sickening thud. She lay there, motionless, a thin trickle of blood starting to pool beneath her dark hair. Natalie, Adrian gasped, his germophobia flaring up instantly as he saw the blood. He took a step back, his hands shaking violently, his chest heaving. I didn't mean to. She fell. You saw it, Chloe? She fell. I saw it, I said, my voice entirely flat. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. It's over, Adrian. What are you doing? Call an ambulance. Call Dr. Keller. He panicked, reaching for his own phone. But as he pulled his phone out, the screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. Alert, account balance transfer successful, $14,200,000. Alert, account balance transfer successful, $8,900,000. Alert, corporate trust authorized signatory changed. Adrian stared at the screen, his eyes bulging. What is this? This is impossible. Who did this? I did, I said. Using the mutual reciprocal power of attorney you had me sign last year. I transferred every single penny of your offshore holdings, your corporate trusts, and your personal assets to a private account in my name. As of 5 minutes ago, you are completely, utterly bankrupt. You bitch. Adrian roared, his face turning purple. He lunged at me, his fingers curling into claws, his germophobia forgotten in a wave of homicidal rage. But before he could reach me, the heavy wooden door of the chalet was thrown open. 3 Swiss police officers, accompanied by Dr. Keller and 2 medical orderlies, rushed into the room. Freeze! One of the officers shouted in French, his weapon drawn. Adrian stopped dead in his tracks, his hands raised, his face pale as death. Dr. Keller, thank God, Adrian stammered, pointing at me. She's insane. She's had a psychotic break. She stole my money. She attacked her sister. Look at Natalie. She's bleeding. She needs to be committed immediately. Dr. Keller didn't look at Adrian with professional sympathy. He looked at him with profound disgust. He held up a thick manila folder. Mr. Vance, Dr. Keller said in a cold, accented voice. We received the complete toxicological report of the medication you have been administering to your wife, along with the financial records of the illegal payments you made to our clinic's former administrator to bypass standard evaluation protocols. The Swiss federal authorities have already issued a warrant for your arrest. No, this is a mistake. It's a setup. Adrian screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. The officers moved forward, grabbing his arms and twisting them behind his back. The moment the metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Adrian let out a guttural, panicked scream. Get them off. Get them off me. They're dirty. There's rust on them. Get them off, he shrieked, thrashing wildly. His severe OCD and germophobia, weaponized by the terror of the situation, completely took over his mind. He began to hyperventilate, his eyes rolling back, saliva dripping from his mouth as he struggled against the officer's grip. Take him out, the lead officer ordered. As they dragged him through the door, his screams echoed down the snowy valley, a pathetic, desperate sound that was quickly swallowed by the freezing winter wind. The medical orderlies quickly attended to Natalie. She had suffered a mild concussion, but she was conscious. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, she looked at me through her tears, her face filled with an overwhelming, desperate plea for forgiveness. Chloe, she whispered, her voice choking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I walked over to the side of the stretcher. I looked down at the sister I had once pushed out of the way of a speeding truck. I saved your life once, Natalie, I said, my voice quiet and steady. And you spent the next 10 years helping a monster destroy mine. I don't hate you, but I will never see you again. Chloe, please. She wept, but the orderlies moved her out of the room, leaving me alone in the silent, warm chalet. I walked over to the stone fireplace. The crackling would cast a warm, golden glow across the room. I picked up the laptop, opened it, and watched the video of the future Chloe one last time. The pale, sickly face on the screen looked back at me, her eyes filled with a wild, crazed laugh. Do you hear them? Adrian never loved you. Just pull the trigger. End it now. Set them free. I smiled softly, my finger hovering over the trackpad. I did, I whispered to the screen. But I didn't pull the trigger on myself. I pulled it on them. I deleted the file. The screen went dark, reflecting my own face, no longer pale, no longer hollow, but alive, sharp, and entirely whole. 2 years later, the sun rose over the lake in Zurich, casting a brilliant, golden light across the clear, blue water. I sat on the balcony of my private apartment, a cup of hot black coffee resting between my hands. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of fresh pine and the distant, snow-capped mountains. My left wrist still bore a faint, thin white scar, a reminder of the night I chose to live, rather than die, to set myself free. I pulled up the morning news on my tablet. A small, local headline caught my eye. Former corporate executive Adrian Vance sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security psychiatric prison. According to the report, Adrian's mental state had completely deteriorated during his confinement. Deprived of his sterile, controlled environment, his severe OCD and germophobia had turned inward, driving him into a state of permanent, catatonic psychosis. He spent his days scrubbing his own skin with abrasive industrial soap, screaming about the invisible dirt that covered his body. He was locked in a prison of his own mind, a cage far worse than any sanatorium he had planned for me. And Natalie? She had returned to our hometown, completely ruined. Her reputation was shattered, her guilt a heavy, suffocating weight she would carry for the rest of her life. She worked at a small, low-income clinic, spending her days trying to repay a debt to society that could never be settled. They were both alive, but they were pinned to the pillar of shame forever, their grand, tragic romance exposed as nothing but a sickening, pathetic farce. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warm, rich liquid wash away the last lingering taste of the past. I stood up, walked to the edge of the balcony, and looked out at the vast, open horizon. The air was cold, the sky was clear, and for the first time in my life, the future belonged entirely to me.